Stranger Things is real, and the real-life story that inspired the series is infinitely more bizarre than the show could ever touch in 4 seasons. Strange beasts from other dimensions, mind control, time travel, alien technology, psychics hooked up to machinery to amplify their minds, invisibility, Mars travel, weather manipulation, frequency technology, experimentation on children, and even Nazis. I barely scratched the surface because there's so much more involved in these leaked claims that led the Duffer Brothers to create Stranger Things. This is literally the holy grail of high strangeness beyond what the world has ever potentially seen. So hold on to your hats, because by the end of this episode, I guarantee you won't be able to recognize up from the upside down. Join me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, for a metaphysical show that's out of this world. Now, before we get to all this, I have to set the stage a little bit. Originally, Stranger Things was going to be called Montauk based on the government's highly classified Montauk Project that allegedly took place in the 70s and 80s at Camp Hero in Montauk, Long Island, New York. Now, some say it's all just a conspiracy theory because it sounds too outlandish, but after the government had to admit to many other confirmed human experiments like MK Ultra mind control, I say let's hear what the claims are before we jump to conclusions. The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, is a book that you can go read yourself, written by an electromagnetics expert named Preston Nichols. Nichols is considered to be the main whistleblower about this project, but many other people tie in too, whose testimonies corroborated being involved. This book and the story it tells about the history and happenings at Camp Hero are incredible. Why? The Montauk Project is inherently connected to other major classified projects that the government had been secretly experimenting on for the greater part of the 20th century. The ones you need to know about are the Phoenix Project, which had to do with weather manipulation, the Philadelphia Experiment, aka Project Rainbow, which had to do with invisibility, cloaking, and time manipulation, MK Ultra, which had to do with mind control, and Operation Paperclip, which happened after World War II to bring in the top Nazi scientists from Germany to the United States. Sure, no ethical problems tied to any of these, right? Multiple whistleblowers like Preston Nichols, Al Bielek, and Duncan Cameron, to name a few, along with intricately detailed extrapolations on history, technology, and the timeline of events, make this project kinda impossible to debunk. I know because I tried. But in order to unravel all of this, we're going to need a synopsis of who Nichols is and what exactly happened. For those who don't know, the main whistleblower behind the Montauk Project leaking to the public what happened is Preston Nichols, a radio and electrical engineer who became an expert in electromagnetic phenomena. Nichols worked for a defense contractor in 1971. In legalese, that means any person who enters into a contract with the United States to furnish materials, industrial resources, or a critical technology for the national defense, or to perform services for the national defense. While working there, a series of strange events started to occur to him. Outside of work, while he was doing experiments, Nichols detected a strange signal. Tracking it down, it seemed to be coming from Montauk Point. Investigating further, Nichols traveled to what he thought was the source of this disturbance and found that the old base called Camp Hero was the source. But something was off. This base was known to be defunct and inactive for a number of years. But here it was, active and highly guarded. On the base was an old World War II radar system called the SAGE radar, something capable of creating the disturbance he'd notice if it were active. Of course, Nichols was stonewalled at the gate and never got in, so he basically shrugged and let the matter go. Several years later, though, a friend who knew he was interested in what was going on there told him the base was suddenly now abandoned. When he took a look, he found debris strewn everywhere and a lot of really expensive equipment that he wanted to obtain. Nichols came back to the site with a scrapping contract to load up his nerd van with all that equipment strewn around, but this is where it all started to get stranger. He bumped into a Camp Hero hobo who claimed to have been there since the base had been abandoned when the beast appeared. And as weird as that was, it wasn't the craziest thing that he said, because Homeless Bro claimed to recognize him and even know him well. What? A couple weeks later, someone barged into Nichols' house claiming that Nichols was his boss. But Nichols didn't recognize the man at all. These strange occurrences led him into an all-out investigation into what the heck was going on at Montauk. He camped out near Montauk Point and started asking the locals about their experiences with the now abandoned Air Force Base. The locals reported bizarre activity like snow in the middle of August, hurricane-force winds that came out of nowhere, thunderstorms, and electrical storms when there was nothing on the weather radar. Large numbers of animals would suddenly come into the town, some crashing into windows. A chief of police who Nichols talked to said that crimes would inexplicably happen all at the same time during 2-hour intervals, stop, and then start up again. Teens were reported to suddenly arrive somewhere in the Montauk village all together in groups for 2 hours and then, as if coming out of a daze, disperse. Nichols then started snooping around more at work after receiving mail addressed to him, but calling him an executive at his agency, which he wasn't. He started finding band-aids on his body that would appear when he'd never put any on. All of this culminated in him wandering into places he shouldn't be at work and discovering an executive office where he found a nameplate on a desk that said Preston B. Nichols, Assistant Project Director. It was almost like he was leading a double life with no record of his activities. How was he having all of these experiences outside of his normal life that didn't match up with his memories? At the end of this episode, professional remote viewer John Vivanco will give us more information about Nichols' story and his state of mind that will shed more light on this, so stay tuned. But after finding one another in this process, Nichols and other whistleblowers came out publicly about their collective discoveries, and he claimed his full memory came back to him around 1990. Shortly after that, he was laid off from work. Just what exactly happened in the Montauk Project that was so secretive that even their participants weren't allowed to remember? Now that we've covered that, we need to take a step back, and I want to give you everything you need to know about the government experiments that led up to the Montauk Project. The United States has a rich history of using science and scientists to develop technology to defend national security. A lot of this tech culminated in the 1940s during and around World War II. For instance, the Manhattan Project was started to build a bomb that could end the war. Operation Paperclip was secretly developed to absorb into America all of the maniacally brilliant Nazi scientists that were developing technology already much further advanced than anywhere else on the planet. And it wasn't just Nazis that came over to America, but brilliant Germans and Europeans in general who came over too. Dr. John von Neumann was allegedly one of these, and also alleged to have been involved in the Montauk Project. Neumann was a brilliant mathematician and theoretical physicist who had arguably the most advanced concepts of space and time available at the time. Now, Neumann helped in the Manhattan Project, and with numerous other things, including, as I said, the Montauk Project, according to Preston Nichols. Now, the US was attempting to create a cloaking device that could hide a ship from an enemy's radar. The Philadelphia experiment, aka Project Rainbow, which came from this attempt, was simultaneously the biggest success and disaster potentially ever recorded. On October 28, 1943, the US attempted to create an electromagnetic bottle effect to that end. Well, what the heck does that even mean? Essentially, this would be an electromagnetic force field around a naval ship that would allow it to escape enemy radar. There was a crew on board the USS Eldridge Navy destroyer escort for the Philadelphia experiment. To make a long story short, not only did the ship disappear from radar, but allegedly it disappeared entirely, showing up hundreds of miles away, then reappearing where it started. So the experiment was successful, right? Well, not for the crew. Most of them were fused and melded into the ship. For the ones who survived, the apparent time anomaly and trauma from the experiment drove them mad. Crazy people from the event made plausible deniability of the entire experiment really easy. But hey, it led to the stealth fighter tech, right? But that's a whole other episode entirely. Now, I want you to comment below if you want us to do episodes on the Philadelphia experiment. We probably got to get to that one. The psychoanalyst and psychiatrist Wilhelm Reich, who was one of the most controversial figures here, was allegedly working with the United States government under another project, the Phoenix Project, using his theories about what he called orgone energy and dead orgone energy to manipulate the weather. Imagine it like positive chi and negative chi, or yin and yang, positive and negative energy. According to Reich, all matter has these substances, and he theorized that a storm with more dead orgone energy, as he called it, would be much more powerful because of an overabundance of that energy. If you balance the storm by shooting positive orgone energy into it, that would theoretically dissolve the storm entirely. Theoretically. So Reich went ahead and built a cloud-busting ray gun that he used to disperse storms before they started. Now, you may be thinking, well, that's just a storm, Rob. Why would the government care? Well, this wasn't just about the weather. Harnessed correctly, could you start to influence animals or even humans with these positive and negative energies? According to the Montauk Project, yes. One of the most startling things about the show Stranger Things isn't what they sometimes say, But what they don't say, I found what could be one of the craziest Easter eggs in the series I haven't seen anyone else mention. At the end of Season 4, which was released in 2022, the Duffer Brothers, who created the show, used a memorable song by Kate Bush called Running Up That Hill. Remember that, right? It fit in perfectly with the events taking place in the show and made Kate Bush a whopping $2.3 million from royalties for a song released back in 1985. You gotta wonder though, why Kate Bush? Why that song? Did you know that she also released a song called Cloud Busting in the same album starring Donald Sutherland in the music video? The song is about Wilhelm Reich, and you gotta wonder whether this was an accident or whether the Duffer Brothers have done as much research as I have on this stuff. Who are the Duffer Brothers and how much have they been let in on? Or was that just a coincidence or from their research? That itself is another huge rabbit hole that I can't even begin to unravel here. Now, finally, at the end of this list of crazy operations the government was working on, intelligence agencies were also experimenting with mind control studies for a large part of the 20th century, MKUltra being the most notable. Why was this project important? Because how can you run highly classified secret operations unless you have a way of wiping everyone's memories? Or at least complete control. Now, my goal is to give you a background of things that led to the Montauk Project because first and foremost, the Montauk Project seems to be an accumulation of all of these previous moves, as you'll see here. What was the Montauk Project and what really happened at Camp Hero in Montauk, New York? According to Preston Nichols, by the time Congress finally disbanded Project Rainbow, that is, the technologies around the USS Eldridge and the disappearing ship developed for covert cloaking that seemed to bend time and space, they had already built a huge technological empire around this. They also had a massive amount of information from Wilhelm Reich and the studies done on Orgone from developing his advanced technology, which could 100% affect a person's mind. If you think that's a stretch, look up the peripheral evidence on the Voice of God technology, which could stop a war before it even started by beaming the sound of a human voice across a distance into enemies' minds. In order for something like the Montauk Project to work, there would have to be ways for the military-industrial complex and intelligence agencies to carry out projects that were so classified they were above the oversight of Congress and top leadership. All of this we can consider to be true unless we're totally naive. I mean, the CIA has allegedly found ways around this for decades. If you don't believe it, go watch the movie American Made with Tom Cruise. According to the real events depicted in this movie, the CIA funded operations by bringing in money from the drug trade. Or you can check out the real events in the movie The Laundromat with Meryl Streep.
Bribery, corruption, money laundering, millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Now, in order to put all of this accumulated tech and R&D into effect, they needed a place to experiment and push all these projects forward together. The military base at Camp Hero was the perfect location, because not only did it have facilities, but the key factor was that it also housed the then defunct powerful SAGE radar from World War II that could emit the proper frequencies for their experiments, which caused all the wacky accounts of bizarre activity in the area. We're talking tests on servicemen without their consent, teenagers gathering at certain locations in Montauk without knowing why they were there, and so much more. But those mysterious events were just the tip of the iceberg. The SAGE radar could emit frequencies that Preston Nichols reported interfered with the psychics he was running experiments on when he was working under a defense contract. The frequencies that created this disturbance were recorded between 425 and 450 megahertz. Yeah, that's right. Nichols was working with psychics. Stay tuned for part 2 in the series where I'll dive into that. As you'll see, undocumented and without oversight, the Montauk Project was like MKUltra mind control on steroids, and by 1971, it was up and running. The difference here was that the technology built into the SAGE radar was set to emit frequencies. Now, here's where things get even weirder when we start learning how all of this worked. The SAGE radar was hooked up to a chair inside a shielded room. Whoever was in the chair controlled the SAGE radar. So who did they put in the chair? Well, a psychic, of course. What the heck? This is like a jacked up Professor X with a nightmarish amount of energy. The psychic who was used the most for these experiments was a man named Duncan Cameron, who also appears to be one of the major whistleblowers for the Montauk Project. They weren't just experimenting with emitting waves to control people via the radar, but they were also experimenting on the people in the chair themselves and their exposure to the energy being emitted, which caused a lot of damage, but we won't get into that here for time's sake. Now, it's important to note here, though, that an overarching theme with the whistleblowers coming forward was, at least in part, the unethical experimentation that was going on. At first, the Montauk Project tested different waves and wavelengths, seeing how the waves could change human behavior and change brainwaves. But they needed live subjects to do that. Well, according to Preston Nichols, the Camp Hero base, which was on the beautiful coast of Long Island, would sometimes house invited servicemen for rest and relaxation. While there, and without any kind of consent, these servicemen would be subject to these waves being beamed at them, and the scientists observed the effects on the men's mood. But it didn't stop there. The Montauk Project pushed these experiments further. Next, these experimentations were also allegedly done on the townspeople of Long Island and civilians in Connecticut, New Jersey, and even upstate New York, to see just how far of a distance people would be affected. And all of this was to generate enough data to see exactly how all of this wacky behavior manipulation could work. The people or psychics involved in the Montauk Project were not being used for no reason either. Understanding the psychics' emitted waves and recording them could enable the scientists to replicate the waves' effects, at least in part, without a human needing to operate the entire thing. After several years, they had created the ultimate mind control device. At this point, we need to dig into the functions of the Montauk chair, because not only is it shocking, but the chair and the recordings of the waves were also just the beginning. Now, as the story goes, scientists at Camp Hero in Montauk, New York created technology that could decode the thoughts of their psychics sitting in their special chair and display and record them with a supercomputer. How do we know it's possible? Well, as an electromagnetics expert, Preston Nichols went into an absurd amount of technical detail about what computers were used for at the time and how all of this worked. I'll omit the technical mumbo-jumbo and just stick to the basics, though. In trying to build the chair, Nichols claimed that our everyday technology could only take them so far, so they had to use a mixture of almost every accumulated invention of note, including Tesla coils and even alien technology to finalize the chair. What the heck? Essentially, this thing was like a human thought display, visualizing the thoughts on a screen and amplifying the person's thoughts in the control chair. So technicians could not only observe the subject sitting there, but also any thoughts they had actually visualized on screen. Of course, it was described that it took years to get all of this working correctly, with a ton of research and development to overcome issues that were constantly coming up. I know all of this sounds too crazy to believe, but this is literally the story of the Montauk Project, and our job with Metaphysical is to tell you what we find and then reveal whether any of it could be true, which I'll be getting to shortly. Other bizarre experiments were conducted too, which seemed to cross the occult with science. For example, they would hand their psychic Duncan Cameron a few strands of someone's hair. Cameron wouldn't know whose hair it was, but while holding the hair and sitting in the Montauk chair, Cameron would be able to see through the eyes of the person whose hair he was holding. Preston Nichols claimed that they took these experiments to the next level, focusing on using the technology to control the live thoughts and actions of the person whose DNA Cameron had from a distance. And as if it couldn't get any crazier, after stabilizing the technology more, they began using the psychic to emit thoughts through the machine and through the Sage radar, which created way more powerful waves than the psychic could do on his own. Nichols claimed that focused thought could actually manifest materially from the overwhelming amount of energy released by the transmitter. Well, what do I mean by that? Objects could materialize on the base once Cameron focused his thoughts. Literally, just visualizing a solid object, that thing would materialize wherever on the base he intended, pure creation out of thought. As they continued these experiments, though, there seemed to be a glitch that came up that confused the technicians and scientists. This psychic's ability to manifest things in 3D seemed to stop working all of a sudden, or so they thought. They noticed that whatever object that Cameron focused on would materialize hours later than they expected. And this changed everything, because this wasn't a glitch at all. It was a time anomaly. For the next couple of years, they scrapped everything they knew and focused solely on understanding how the technology they were building could be used to manipulate time and space. Using Cameron in the chair, they began experimenting with opening up portals to the past and the future. Wherever Cameron focused his mind using the powers of the machine, they could open up tunnels and experiment with sending people through them, from Montauk to anywhere in time. And if you were thinking this couldn't get any crazier than that, it does. Nichols claimed the book Alternative 3 is real, which in a nutshell claimed that humans would put a colony on Mars. Well, humans have done that according to his account, and the top brass at Montauk was aware of this off-world colony and were somehow in touch with those living there. Nichols claimed they were trying to get into the underground caverns that were below the Cydonia area, which is where the infamous face on Mars is. These Mars colonizers were looking to utilize a previous civilization's technology and needed to get down there, but they were having an impossible time doing so. Using the Montauk Project's technology, though, they were able to create a warp tunnel to explore the caverns and find what they needed. All of this is totally insane. Most of these time experiments leading up to the more covert missions like the Mars one were done using the homeless and people who Nichols claimed would not be missed if something went wrong. For some reason, children were also sent through these portals. Some believe it's because children are more open and able to access amazing powers, like the kids in StrangerThings who were just called numbers like 1 and 11. Apparently, due to the nature of time experimentation and the glitches that would occur before they stabilized this tech, thousands of people who were a part of the experiment were lost in time. As you can imagine, this created a huge moral rift between the people working on the project and the administrators who were calling the shots, which grew larger and larger over the course of time, and this ended up culminating in disaster. On August 12, 1983, the Montauk scientists were given the order to turn on the SAGE radar transmitter indefinitely. 7 days later, all hell broke loose when the transmitter seemed to lock in on something else. It had created a wormhole that connected with the USS Eldridge, the vanishing ship that had disappeared exactly 40 years earlier. Preston Nichols and some others who'd been very dissatisfied with the executives running the project gave psychic Duncan Cameron a signal, and he allegedly let loose a psychic beast on the premises of Camp Hero, which destroyed everything in its path. And this ended what we know as the Montauk Project. Or did it? Okay, now I want to get into whether any of this could be true. I mean, all of this seems way too much to believe. So I asked John Vivanco, our resident professional remote viewer, to look into whether there was any truth to the sensational claims that Preston Nichols made in his book and interviews. And you're not going to believe what he found. Roll it.
In the late 1990s, early 2000s, I was working in this remote viewing think tank, and we were approached by someone in an intelligence agency with a request, which was a semi-normal occurrence. Now, because whatever they wanted us to look at was likely classified, all they could say was, hey, can you look at something that some scientists may have done and the repercussions of it? Now, with remote viewing, it's not a big deal to task on this and get good information because only the client can relate this information to an event, and this keeps us protected if in fact there was a classification on it. So we looked at it, and our data was describing something that some scientists did do, just like he asked, just like he was thinking. And they did this because they knew how, not because it was right, but because they knew how to do it. In fact, there was a lot of hubris around this, there was a lot of ego around this, but they didn't have the whole picture, or like a universal understanding, or universal implications about what they were doing. They just did it because they could. And what the data described on what they did was that they had opened up through technological means, well, a portal of sorts, but it was more than that, and slightly different. It was more about changing the basic structure of our dimensional reality by merging it in part with another reality so it becomes fused. And this is something catastrophic, something that should not go together with our reality. It's also unchangeable after it's done. It'd be akin to like ice cream and mustard or socks with sandals, but with reality altering effects that are unchangeable. And from this, the data described that there was some type or types of creatures that now had access to our reality, and they can move freely in it, freely in and out of it. Now, we didn't know what this was about, right? We did the project and we just gave the data back to the contact. And he basically said that he thought this was the case, and it's kind of unfortunate, and that was it. Now, later on, I recalled seeing the depiction of the Montauk monster on the series Stranger Things. And when I saw it, I suspected it was so similar, and it acted in such the same way as this data in this tasking, that I suspected that this project was related to Montauk. So this is years later, right? Obviously. And I decided that we needed to dig deeper into the Montauk Project. We had viewed it, I think, once in the past, deep past. But I wanted to see if there were any similarities between the Montauk Project and what this intelligence officer had tasked us on. The data is very similar, where we have scientists doing something that they can do, they can do it, so they're gonna do it, but they should not be doing it. It's very, very similar. It's also the same creature, literally the same being, same descriptions, everything, attitudes shows up in this Montauk experiment data. I would say that the depiction of the creature in the Stranger Things series is very accurate up against our remote viewing data. Now, the other aspects described was that they were able to open up a portal, or more than that, again, merge with another reality, another dimension, using technological means, primarily through the use of some form of radar and other frequencies causing this very deep, expansive resonance effect. There's also likely a resonance effects conducted in the brains and bodies of the people who they sent through, because they did send people through. Now, this had the effect of creating some sort of psychic component on top of everything else. Now, the people they sent through, according to our data, were kids. They sent kids to this other dimension reality because when they came back, if they did, some didn't, there was less of a chance that their minds would crack because they have more plasticity when they're younger. And they were sent to this place that was literally like right next door to our dimension. Now, in Stranger Things, they call it the Upside Down, which is a good word for it. It describes it well because it seems to be this sort of darker, slightly mirror realm to where we are, but there are dangers with other beings there. And it's hard to find your way back if you lost sight of the area from which you went in. So because of that, if some wandered off, they would be lost to our reality forever. And mostly what happened is that the kids who did go through, if they survived or not got lost, they would stay as close as possible to the area where they went in. If they did that, then they were more likely to make it out. Now, on top of all this, we also have a very large MK Ultra component in order to enhance certain capabilities of the kids going through, on top of making them forget. So from the data that we have on all this, I would surmise that, yeah, indeed, the legends around Montauk are true for the most part. And I do believe at this point that that old project we worked on for the intelligence officer was connected into this.
Okay, I can't even begin to convey how exciting it is to confirm that at least the main gist of the experimentations going on at Montauk are real. We're not collectively crazy. Craziest of all has to be that the famed beast of Montauk isn't just a figment of our conspiratorial imagination. Something crossed over into our dimension. Is it still here among us? With that said, though, Metaphysical has done show after show about the true nature of psychological operations in the disclosure community. In our episode on UFO disinformation agents are real, we outlined exactly how these operations are carried out in even your favorite UFO or paranormal mystery. This can often leave us befuddled as we wonder how we can wade through and find the truth in all of these lies. Preston Nichols, for instance, displays many questionable traits when it comes to the veracity of his claims. One of the things that makes it so confusing is that his in-person interviews seems to display someone who has an enormous amount of technical info about how all of this worked, to the point where the listener might have a hard time denying what he was saying without other third-party experts weighing in. The problem, though, then becomes what the worldview of that third-party expert would be, and whether they'd be able to accept the unbelievable when verifying or denying his information. On top of that, Nichols' outward demeanor is honestly strange. I mean, sure, Nichols is a bit of an egghead. He's a nerdy guy with what seems to be a bit of an ego that makes you think twice before believing anything he says. Now, another factor involved here is that anytime MK Ultra gets mentioned as being a part of any project, or any kind of mind control for that matter, we have no idea the extent to which it was implemented and how much a particular whistleblower's claims could be true or just false memories. Additionally, one of the more confusing things is that the other whistleblowers that came out to back up Nichols' claims, Al Bielek and Duncan Cameron, don't display the same traits as Nichols, and they deliver information with a much calmer and more believable delivery. Al Bielek is especially someone we'll need to come back to because his involvement in Montauk and with the Philadelphia experiment needs some attention to get to the bottom of what really went on and how much of it coincides with what Nichols was claiming. All in all, Stranger Things isn't just a fantasy show we've all come to love, but now we can feel more confident that it's actually based on a true story. And for all of those content creators who debunked it because they don't know how to use proper discernment or understand how psychological operations play a role in the real world, I hope this gives you some additional information that gives us a little more pause. If you've ever had a metaphysical experience or remembered strange things you couldn't explain, I want you to comment below. This is one of the only places you're not going to get ridicule, but find a tribe of open-minded people who just might have gone through what you did. If you like this episode and want more, I have a playlist on mind experiments you'll definitely want to check out, plus remote viewing episodes and more. And if you'd like to support the work that we do here, we have a supporter donation tier that you can find at themetaphysical.tv. Or if you want access to thousands of more videos on ancient civilizations, mysteries, and exclusive after-hour shows not on YouTube, subscribe to the Mystery Junkie tier or higher. And for only a limited time, you can get the holiday discount that gets you 25% off an annual subscription to the Metaphysical.tv. That's basically the cost of a cup of coffee a month to enjoy metaphysical bonus content and more all year. And I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's already over there because you're making it possible to dive into these amazing topics. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe so the YouTube algorithm knows to push us out to more people. And with that, I hope you thought this episode was the strangest of Stranger Things.